Hello, everybody, and welcome to my Kamigawa set breakdown. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down all sorts of things that will be helpful for you going into your Neon Dynasty drafts, including things like how well each theme is supported, how many of each card type there are that is actually going to fit within a cohesive archetype, how certain removal spells are going to line up with the format, and more things of that nature. You're going to understand it a bit better as I dive into it further, but basically it's going to be a ton of helpful information for your draft experience. Before I dive in though, I want to remind you, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel for more draft content, including plenty of Neon Dynasty, and comment below with your questions, thoughts, and feedback. Let's get started. So, since this is a draft breakdown primarily, we're going to be, and by primarily I mean pretty much exclusively, it's going to be focusing on the commons and uncommons, which are going to dictate how a draft plays out mostly. So there are 106 non-land commons in the set, 56 of which are creatures, 31 artifacts, 29 enchantments, and a total of 79 permanents. Now the reason I broke it down this way is creatures is a pretty good baseline to compare things with. There's usually a lot of creatures in the set, and so seeing that there are 31 artifacts in the set makes more sense when it's compared to the number of creatures in the set. Also, by phrasing it this way, we can see that of the creatures, artifacts, and enchantments, which would normally make up a lot of permanents, there are quite a bit of overlap because there's only 79 permanents, but there are 56 creatures, 31 artifacts, 29 enchantments. So there's a lot of artifact creatures and enchantment creatures. In the uncommons, there are 85 non-lands, there are 55 creatures, 26 artifacts, 25 enchantments, and a total of 70 permanents. So these are just some numbers that are going to be used as baselines for analysis moving forward. The first thing I wanted to look at was some removal statistics, because Fade into Antiquity in this sort of set has the potential to be a premium removal spell because of how many artifacts and enchantments there are. So what I did was I saw how many of the commons and uncommons would die to Fade into Antiquity, which is an unconditional removal spell for artifacts and enchantments, and I compared that to what percentage of the cards die to Twisted Embrace, which is unconditional removal for creatures. So the percentage of commons, which I took as creatures divided by total number of permanents, because you're never using removal on instants and sorceries. That would be impossible. But basically, so number of creatures divided by number of permanents. So 71% of the commons can be killed by Twisted Embrace. So 100% of the creatures, but it can't kill some of the specific artifacts and enchantments. And then 78.6% of the uncommons can be killed by Twisted Embrace. By contrast, Fade into Antiquity can kill 76 almost percent of the commons in the set and almost 73% of the uncommons. So it does kill quite a bit more of the commons and quite a bit less of the uncommons. However, with this sort of thing, it's also important to remember that a lot of artifacts and enchantments do stuff when they come into play. So something like Twisted Embrace gets counted among the enchantments that Fade into Antiquity would kill, but overall, you're not really going to ever use Fade into Antiquity on Twisted Embrace. So adjusting those down a little bit would make sense because there are certain enchantments and artifacts that you aren't going to be targeting with your removal. But still, Fade into Antiquity has a large hit rate in this set, and as a result, I expect it to be a premium removal spell that you're going to play quite a few copies of in your main deck if you are in a green archetype. So Fade into Antiquity really benefits from this sort of analysis because in a lot of sets, it wouldn't be a card you really care about, but in this one, it looks like one that you are going to have to prioritize and take early. Another thing I looked at with removal was how specifically artifact removal would line up, and so I wanted to compare it to another kind of situational spell that costs the same amount. So Kami's Flare does 3 damage to creatures, and Explosive Entry can destroy an artifact. So comparing these commons, they're in the same color, they cost the same amount, one's an instant, one's a sorcery. 54.4% of the common creatures of the commons, so that includes the permanents, so it kills quite a few of the creatures, doesn't kill any of the artifacts and enchantments, obviously, but it'll kill 54.4% of the commons, 61.4% of the uncommon permanents in the set, and Explosive Entry is quite a bit behind. It's about 15 percentage points lower in terms of how many commons it'll kill, and about almost 24 percentage points lower in how many of the uncommons it will kill. So it isn't killing a ton of the commons and uncommons, but it is still killing a decent chunk. 40% of the permanents at common is a pretty large amount, and then 37% of the uncommons means that there is going to generally be a target for this, and so it could be worth playing a copy. And of course, with Kami's Flare, it's pretty much you'll play as many copies as you can get because the card does have a lot of just kills, over half of the common permanents, and so it's just going to be very effective against their creatures. The final removal thing I looked at was Lucky Offering, which is an even more situational artifact removal spell, and I compared it with Voltage Surge, which is a 2 damage spell. I didn't use the 4 damage mode on Voltage Surge for my analysis. It would kill substantially more, but it does require extra support. And so I was just seeing how much the 2 damage mode did, because again, I liked to compare a 1 mana spell to a 1 mana spell to just get a kind of a sense of this. It's very interesting to note that Voltage Surge has relatively similar numbers to the Explosive Entry. So 39% of the permanents from Explosive Entry and 36% of the permanents from Voltage Surge. So Explosive Entry is probably main deckable, even though it's a little bit more clunky than Voltage Surge. Voltage Surge is going to be killing a lot of the commons, a lot of the uncommons, and then Lucky Offering still has reasonable numbers. It's going to be killing almost a quarter of the commons, and it's going to be killing a decent amount of the uncommons as well. And so that card is probably fringe main deckable, but definitely a card that you can consider main decking, and it looks like it'll be a very good sideboard card for the right matchup as well. So that was just some removal analysis. I thought it would be interesting to break down, because in this sort of set, sometimes it's easy to say, oh, there's artifacts and enchantments. Clearly I should run my artifact removal, but it's always good to kind of have a better understanding of that sort of thing. Moving on to the next kind of section, I'm talking about like specific mechanics or themes of the set, and here I'm focusing on modified. So these are all of the commons and uncommons that have modified. And it's important to realize that there's only 6 commons and there's only 7 uncommons. So considering that there were 106 commons and 85 uncommons, these numbers are not particularly high in terms of the number of cards that have modified on them, which means that I don't think you're going to be building a modified deck per se, which is important to know, because you're not really going to be going, okay, I have to take every card that has modified on it, because if you're trying to do that, you're going to be limited in what you can take pretty severely. Instead, I think modified is going to be more of an incremental, incidental, synergy, where you have some cards that can put counters on them, and you have some cards that have modified, but you don't actually go out of your way to just take every card with modified on it. It's also worth noting that the kind of color distribution isn't focused in 2 colors. If it was 13 cards, but it was only focused in 2 colors, that would be one thing. But because there are a couple of black modified cards, a blue modified cards, that means that you're generally, if you wanted to build a red-green modified deck, then you would only have 10 cards to work with, split up across rarities and the 2 colors. And I don't think that's going to lead to a full-on modified deck, that there will be benefits from putting counters on your creatures still. So this is just something that's worth knowing. And yeah, you're not really going to be going full out, but there are still benefits. And a card like Walking Skyscraper, for example, front and center in this photo, is a good example of a card where it does benefit from you having a bunch of creatures with counters on them, but it's not saying it doesn't give extra +1/+1 counters to all of your creatures or things like that. It's just a 1-card thing that you can kind of put into a deck that has some counter synergies. You don't have to go out of your way to enable a lot of these cards. Some of them just care about having any creature that's modified. So yeah, basically the conclusion I wanted folks to get from this slide was modified isn't the sort of mechanic that you just have the modified deck, because there's just not enough commons and uncommons to support it. There's only 6 commons that have modified on them. So yeah, that was just something that I thought was worth noting. Next up is the 2 types archetype from white-black. I didn't know exactly what to call it, but I figured it would also be worth diving into, similar to modified, in terms of how well it would potentially be supported. So across white-black, there are a total of 7 cards that care about you having both an artifact and an enchantment in play, 2 of which are common, the Nezumi Blade Blesser and the Kami of Terrible Secrets, and 5 of which are uncommons. And so the ratios that I expressed here is, of the 38 commons that are black or white, only 2 of them care about this theme. They're both in black. And of the 27 potential uncommons for this color combination, only 5 of them care about this potential theme. Now, another thing that's also worth noting is that a lot of these cards are going to be premium interaction anyway. So a card like Banishing Slash or Assassin's Ink are just going to be great removal spells that any white deck or any black deck will want respectively. So you don't get to pick these up as a reward for being in this archetype. Really, the only great card that you're going to gain access to if you kind of go into this theme is Naomi Pillar of Order, which is a really good card if you are enabling this theme. But because it's the only real payoff that you're really super psyched to get, the other cards get a little bit better, but they're not I don't think it's gonna really be a full archetype really that you get. I think it's just more of an incidental thing. So that's, I think, worth knowing about this little archetype. Next is a little bit of a breakdown of the artifacts. So as I already talked about at the beginning, there are 31 artifacts that are commons, 26 uncommons that are artifacts, and these are the payoffs for having artifacts across the colors. So there's 7 payoffs at common, 12 payoffs at uncommon, and as you can see, they are mostly focused in the blue-red color combination, and that makes sense because blue-red seems to be an artifact-themed deck in this format. And so you're mostly going to be wanting to play blue-red if you are going for an artifact theme. You are going to kind of need to get some uncommon support because there aren't all that many commons that reward you for doing it, but there are more commons that pay you off for doing artifact stuff than for doing modified stuff. And especially because they're focused in 2 colors, it does look like there could be a cohesive artifact deck here, and you'll sometimes get some synergies maybe in other color combinations if you have like a very heavy blue deck with slight like a dip into another color or similar with red, but generally speaking, you're going to be focused on blue-red if you are going to be going heavy into artifacts. Moving on to an analysis of enchantments, this is another one that seems to be very focused into 2 colors, white and green, and these are all of the cards that care about enchantments in the set. So 5 commons, 7 uncommons, and with these ones, it's also worth noting that a lot of the cards are kind of self-contained or playable by themselves without actually having enchantments in your deck. So a card like Blossom Prancer is going to be a good card in any green deck. You don't need enchantments to make it work. Similarly, Bearer of Memory kind of does its own thing because it can put counters on itself. And so some of these cards are going to be just good cards to put in a green deck. But a card like Generous Visitor really does benefit from having a deck that's filled with enchantments. So like a lot of these cards aren't necessarily like, oh, you have to put all enchantments in your deck, but some of them certainly are. And I would just say that if you are going to be building an enchantments deck, you really do have to be, I think, white-green. You don't really get enough payoffs for just being in green if you are going to try and go like with some of these enchantment synergy pieces, which means that a card like Generous Visitor maybe is only really playable in specifically green-white, unless you get some like crazy like deep green, or you have just like a random like outlier of a deck. But these are the payoffs for enchantments in this set, and so it's worth noting that there's not all that many. So outside of like these ones, so you shouldn't. These are the enchantment payoffs, so you shouldn't be like going outside of white green to play enchantment synergies, generally speaking. Next is ninjas, and so this is another really in-depth slide. A lot of numbers on this one, so I'm going to break it down for you. There are 12 cards with a ninjutsu in the set. There are a couple of ninjas that don't have ninjutsu, but we're not going to be talking about those as the ninjas here. There are 5 commons and 7 uncommons. There's 1 card that costs 1 to ninjutsu, 8 that cost 2 to ninjutsu, 1 that costs 3 to ninjutsu, and 2 that cost 4 to ninjutsu. The color breakdown of those cards is there's 1 white ninjutsu card, there are 4 blue, 4 black, 2 green, and then 1 blue-black card. And then the ninjas that care about you having ninjas are Prosperous Thief and Silver Fur Master. So the Prosperous Thief will get you treasures when you hit with your ninjas, and the Silver Fur Master will buff your ninjas and make your ninjutsus cost a lot less. So what this kind of tells me is that ninjutsu doesn't just have to be a blue-black like color plan, like blue-black deck, because there is a little bit of support in green as well. Though if you are going super heavy into ninjas, you're probably going to want to be going into blue and black. There is in green, the ninjas, there's 1 common and 1 uncommon, so you can get some ninja stuff going if you're maybe playing like black green or something like that, but generally speaking, you're going to want to be blue black if you're heavy ninjas and if you're trying to enable those sorts of themes. And the ninjas are generally going to be costing 2 to ninjutsu, and so because they're really cheap to ninjutsu, it means that you're going to want to be curving into them with your other cheap cards. And so what we're going to be looking at now is the enablers for the ninjas. I kept the white one here just in case you have some weird like white-blue ninjas or white-black ninjas deck. But what we're looking for with enablers is cheap evasive creatures. So we looked at the 1-drops. There is Moth Rider Patrol and Network Disruptor as flyers, and Network Disruptor is pretty much the ideal ninja enabler because it can also tap things to get the ninjas you already have in playthrough. And then Fang of Shigeki, for if you are playing a green ninjas deck, could certainly be a great enabler because your opponent is often going to be loath to try and just trade their creature with your 1/1 Death Toucher because they almost always will have spent more mana than you did, which means that it's kind of a good way to push through and get your ninjas in. And then at 2-drop, the enablers that are pretty nice are cards that either get you a benefit when they enter play, so cards like Spirited Companion or Virus Beetle, and then a card like Inkrise Infiltrator as evasion, and then Papercraft Decoy can be good because if you do return it to your hand, you can sometimes draw a card if you do have extra mana lying around. And then I listed a few cards that are punishers, which are useful to know about whether you're playing with or against ninjutsu. These are the main cards that are going to either make it really difficult to block in the case of Kaito's Pursuit, because it'll give all of the ninjas menace, so they're more likely to be able to hit, or a card like Suit Up, which makes it so that if they're attacking with a small creature, they can really buff that creature up, or a card like You Are Already Dead, which means that if they're attacking you with a small creature and you think they're trying to enable a ninja, they might just be trying to bait you into blocking so they can use You Are Already Dead. So those are kind of the punishers and cards that make ninjas a lot more tricksy to play around. Next up is the Samurai. So the Samurai mechanic is kind of paying you off for if you have a single Samurai or Warrior attacking alone. So in the set, there are 21 Samurai and 5 Warriors broken up among the commons and uncommons, 16 commons, 10 uncommons. There are 20 of them in red-white. And then there are 9 payoffs for attacking alone, 5 commons and 4 uncommons. So this is a theme that is relatively well supported in terms of a lot of the red-white cards are going to be Warriors and Samurai, and a lot of them are going to be paying you off for this kind of attack alone theme. And so the deck seems like it can definitely do some stuff. I think a lot of the time it might play out as just you play a normal aggro strategy, and then when you get brick walled, that's when you start attacking with one creature at a time. Or you can do something like get an early like a key Ronin down and then just start attacking with your creatures alone to get those extra triggers if you really need to dig through your deck. Things of that nature. So it's an interesting strategy, an interesting deck, and it does seem decently well supported, especially compared to some of the other like strategies we've seen. Again, 9 payoffs isn't an overwhelmingly high number, but considering that all of the payoffs are in the same color combination is going to make it a little bit easier to assemble, and especially because 5 of them are commons. Moving on to the last thing we're going to be looking at here is the vehicles. Blue-white does have a minor vehicle theme. There are 8 vehicles in the set, 2 blue, 2 white, 1 blue-white, and 3 colorless vehicles. So if you're going to be going for a dedicated vehicles deck, blue-white is certainly where you want to go for your looking. And then for crew cost of those vehicles, 3 of them are crew 1, 3 of them are crew 2, and 2 of them are crew 3. It's worth noting that the 2 vehicles that are crew 3 are the 2 blue vehicles, and blue is not really known for having high-powered creatures, so those blue vehicles may only be playable in this blue-white deck, where you're going to have access to cards that are pilots. So a card like Born to Drive or Hotshot Mechanic to summon these pilots that can crew vehicles as though their power were 2 greater are really instrumental for crewing these vehicles because it lets your small creatures crew your big vehicles. So those blue vehicles may only be playable in this specific vehicle deck. And then there's a couple of other cool pilots. There's Kitsune Ace, which is particularly good at crewing vehicles with crew 2 or less because it can crew the vehicle and then give that vehicle first strike so it can be evasive, or it can untap the Kitsune Ace if the vehicle it's crewing has vigilance, which one of the colorless vehicles does. Suit Up is also a really cool card for vehicles. I called it a pilot because it lets you turn a vehicle into an artifact creature. So if you have a vehicle sitting around that you don't have the creatures to crew, your opponent might attack into you, and then you can use Suit Up to use your vehicle as a creature for the turn. So pretty neat trick there that maybe isn't super obvious. And then Okiba Reckoner Raid flips into a 2/2 with Menace that gives your vehicles Menace. So if you're playing some of these, or maybe you're playing like black-white vehicles, I think would be the only other home, because as I said, I don't think the blue vehicles are really what you're aiming for if you are playing trying to crew them because they have such high crew costs. But if you're playing something like black-white with a couple of vehicles, then the Reckoner Raid can give you a little bit of menace or something like that. Anyway, that is going to do it for this Neon Dynasty set breakdown. I really do hope you enjoyed it. It was a little bit of a different type of preview season content than I've usually made, and so I thought it would be a really cool idea, and so I'd love to hear what you think in the comment section down below. And if you did make it all the way to the end of the video, in the comment section down below, leave hashtag Neon Breakdown, because it looks like it should rhyme, because like Neon Breakdown, I don't know, it doesn't actually rhyme, but it looked like it kind of could rhyme, so I thought it would be a fun little hashtag to leave to let me know you made it all the way till the end. Remember to hit that thumbs up button if you did like it. I spent a lot of time working on this, doing the analysis and doing all the numbers for these sorts of things, and so if you do want to see this sort of thing in the future, letting me know by hitting the thumbs up button and commenting is really nice. And then also subscribe to the channel for more draft content if you are interested in that and you enjoy this one. You can see plenty more elsewhere on my channel as well. If you would like to support my content, you can do so via the Patreon, patreon.com/NicolaiBolas. There's a link in the description, and you'll gain access to a host of cool rewards and also just help me continue to make these videos. You'll gain access to like my card by card tier list for Neon Dynasty if you're interested in my thoughts on all the cards and stuff of that nature. In the description, you can also find links to the NicolaiBolas Discord, the NicolaiBolas articles, the NicolaiBolas Twitter, the stream, merchandise, all of that cool stuff in the description down below. But that is going to do it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you next time.